Having traveled through the first two chapters, I trust you're now ready to gently step into the third. So, welcome to the Temple of Artemis. Please find a comfortable place to lie down. Close your eyes and let your body relax. Allow your thoughts to drift slowly into the distant past. Tonight, we will part the veil of time and step into a mysterious and ancient journey to visit a sacred monument that once inspired awe in the hearts of the ancients and still captivates our imagination today, the Temple of Artemis. It stood in the ancient city of Ephesus in Western Asia Minor, what is now near the town of Selçuk in modern-day Turkey. This city, revered as a gateway to the divine, was said to have been founded by the warrior women known as the Amazons. Upon this land, one goddess's presence was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. She was Artemis, the goddess of the moon and the hunt. Artemis, one of the 12 Olympians, was the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and the twin sister of Apollo, the sun god. In Greek mythology, she represents the purity of nature, the mysteries of the wild, and the independence of women. She is the protector of maidens, the guardian of beasts and forests. Her footsteps are light, as if gliding through moonbeams, her silver bow always true. To the ancient Greeks, Artemis was not merely a deity, she was nature itself, made divine. So, when the people of ancient Ephesus decided to honor her with a temple, they spared no effort. They believed only the most magnificent, the most majestic sanctuary would be worthy of such a noble goddess. Around the 7th century BCE, the first Temple of Artemis began to take shape. It was built upon a fertile, marshy plain said to symbolize birth, life, and the nurturing spirit that Artemis governed. Though the earliest version of the temple was far more modest than the one that followed, it nonetheless drew pilgrims from near and far. They crossed mountains and forests, sailed the Aegean, just to offer a prayer or a simple bouquet of flowers. To them, this temple was more than a place of worship. It was a bridge between their world and that of the gods. As time passed, the temple was rebuilt more than once. The most famous reconstruction came in the 6th century BCE, funded by Croesus, the wealthy king of Lydia. He commissioned two master architects, Chersiphron and his son Metagenes, to create a sacred marvel in white marble, a home for the goddess unlike anything the world had seen. Historical accounts describe the final structure as measuring 115 meters long and 55 meters wide. It was surrounded by over 100 towering ionic columns, each 18 meters high, standing tall like a forest of stone. Under the sunlight, the temple glowed with a gentle brilliance, as if the moon herself had descended to earth. It was a miracle to the ancient world, and in time, it became one of the 7 wonders. But even this brilliance was not free of shadow. In 356 BCE, a fire engulfed the temple, reducing it to ash. Behind this destruction was a man named Herostratus, a name cursed and remembered for the wrong reasons. He was no nobleman or hero, just a man desperate for fame. To be remembered for eternity, he burned the great temple to the ground. This shocking act would later give rise to the term herostratic fame, the desire to be remembered even through infamy. Yet, the goddess's followers did not despair. They began once more, rebuilding the temple grander than ever. The new sanctuary was so magnificent, it was called a wonder among wonders. It became not only a religious center, but a cradle of art and culture. Sculptors, poets, and philosophers all drew inspiration from its sacred halls. And so, the Temple of Artemis was born not just as a building, but as a legend, a continuation of divine myth, woven from faith, art, and human devotion. Now, take a slow, deep breath. Let this story settle gently in your mind. The outline of the temple begins to form. Columns shimmer faintly in the moonlight. The goddess herself walks softly between the trees. In our next chapter, we will step into this true temple of wonders and listen closely to its structure, its artistry, and its secrets. If you're ready, let us continue this journey across the ages. Please continue lying quietly, letting your body sink gently into the softness of your bed. Close your eyes and let your breath grow long and steady. The night is deepening, and the gates of dreams slowly open, leading us once more to that solitary, sacred temple. You begin to walk slowly, into the moonlit ruins of Ephesus. The ancient city has long been erased by time, only echoes remain, carried gently by the wind. And ahead of you, rising through the mist, a grand white structure begins to emerge. That is the Temple of Artemis. It is vast beyond measure, as if built to mirror the stars. Its facade faces the east, so that each morning, the very first light of dawn pours directly into the heart of the temple, bathing the goddess's statue in a golden radiance. The foundation of the temple was anything but ordinary. It stood on soft, marshy land, which would normally spell disaster for stone buildings. But here, it became a miracle. To stabilize the ground, the builders laid thick layers of charcoal and fleece, then carefully stacked stone upon stone. Each block was measured to perfection, no room for error. This seemingly simple method allowed the colossal temple to endure for centuries, standing tall against time's erosion. Now, imagine yourself stepping into the colonnade of the temple. Each column towers 18 meters above you, adorned with intricate carvings and sacred motifs. You feel their massive presence, and as your fingertips graze their surfaces, you sense the fine, time-worn patterns etched into the stone. The wind flows through the pillars, echoing in a low, solemn whisper, as if retelling stories from thousands of years ago. These are Ionic columns, a classical, graceful design. The capitals curl into elegant spirals, like the goddess's hairpins, delicate yet dignified. There were 127 of these marble columns, perfectly arranged around the main sanctuary. By day, the white stone reflected soft light. By night, they seemed to breathe beneath the moon, like silent guardians standing in a sacred forest. You walk through the colonnade and arrive at the center of the temple, the inner chamber, or naos. This is the most sacred place, reserved only for priests and holy rites. Here stood the great statue of Artemis herself, a towering figure, said to reach the height of a two-story house. Crafted from ebony, gold, and silver, the statue wore a regal crown, and across her chest were mysterious, rounded forms, symbols of fertility and the birth of life. At her feet stood lions and deer, representing strength and the harmony of nature. The temple was not merely the goddess's dwelling, it was a colossal work of art. Countless artisans, sculptors, and painters left their mark here. The doors bore carved scenes from myth, the birth of Apollo and Artemis, Zeus's judgments atop Mount Olympus, Hera's storms of wrath. Each story, vivid and full of movement, seemed to come alive behind your closed eyes, like a dream slowly unfolding. Can you feel it now? This was not just a building. It was a stone-born epic, a silent hymn to the moon goddess, to nature, to the cosmos itself. And what's even more astonishing, the temple was equipped with advanced drainage and ventilation systems. Ephesus lies in an earthquake-prone region, yet the architects accounted for that too. Some column foundations were designed to float, adjusting slightly with tremors, a brilliant technique to prevent cracking and collapse. These subtle designs, even today, inspire awe and admiration. The entire temple complex was richly adorned, but never ostentatious. It was not a place of boastful display, but a home for the divine. Gold and silver were used with restraint. The true majesty lay in the sacred silence, the reverent stillness. It was as if the heavens had descended to earth, and you stood at the threshold of the stars. All around the temple were altars, steps, arcades, and oracular halls. It was not just a building, but a carefully composed kingdom, a place for the goddess, and a sanctuary for human reverence toward nature and the divine. Now, close your eyes gently. Picture yourself stepping back out of the temple, standing in its vast courtyard. You turn to gaze upon the rows of marble columns, standing tall in the night. The stars scatter their light across the scene, like fragments of ancient myth glowing softly on the earth. In the next chapter, we will enter the lives of those who worshipped here. We'll explore the temple's cultural and religious heart, and discover how it became a beacon for the spirit, a sanctuary not only of stone, but of belief. For now, breathe softly. Let this journey settle into your dreams. Like moonlight on calm water, the night has deepened now, and your body seems to merge gently into the stillness of the dark. At this moment, all you need to do is listen and let your thoughts slowly drift into that distant sanctuary, the spiritual heart of an ancient world, the Temple of Artemis, Imagine it now. The first light of dawn cuts across the sky, painting the eastern horizon with soft gold. The great doors of the temple open slowly, and a single beam of sunlight travels through the towering colonnade, resting gently upon the goddess's forehead. A new day has begun. In this sacred place, time seems to be measured not by hours, but by rituals. Worshippers have come from across the mountains and over the seas, drawn here to offer their prayers and gratitude to Artemis. She is not only the goddess of the moon and the hunt, but also the giver of life, the guardian of nature, a symbol of motherhood, independence, and mystery. You can hear the soft sound of ceremonial bells echoing high above in the temple air. The priests move gracefully, dressed in flowing white robes, carrying incense and garlands woven from olive branches. They place the crowns upon their foreheads, a symbol of purity and reverence. From the burners, sacred smoke rises, curling gently through the air, wrapping the entire hall in a soft, sacred haze. At the center of the ritual is the hymn and the prayer. The elders chant verses passed down by voice and memory, slow, deep, and resonant, like the tide of an ancient sea. They ask the goddess to protect the city, to bless the harvest, to watch over expectant mothers, to light the path for travelers beneath the moon, to grant courage and sharp eyes to hunters. Can you feel it? These sounds don't just reach your ears. They resonate deep within your soul. Here, faith is not just ceremony. It is a silent language, a quiet conversation with the divine. People kneel, join their hands, and close their eyes, not to be seen, but to be understood. Beyond daily prayer, the temple hosts a grand spring festival each year, the Artemisia, a celebration held in the goddess's name, lasting several days. All of Ephesus is swept up in sacred joy. The streets are dressed with ribbons and garlands, the temple square filled with stages and markets. Processions of oxen and lambs move solemnly forward. Girls in white veils, carrying flowers, dance and sing to honor the goddess. People bring their most treasured offerings, finely painted pottery, woven tapestries, gold ornaments, and small statues carved by hand. They lay them at the feet of Artemis, sometimes tying parchment prayers beside them, hoping the moonlight will help the goddess read their longings and their sorrows. At night, a ritual known as the silent prayer takes place. Worshippers sit around the temple, each holding a small oil lamp. They speak no words, only whisper prayers in their hearts. Moonlight falls gently across the marble columns, and for a moment, it feels as though the temple itself is breathing, listening quietly to the wishes of the world. For women, the Temple of Artemis holds even deeper meaning. Many young girls come here before marriage, offering wildflowers and a lock of their hair a farewell to childhood. They believe Artemis will guide them into womanhood, granting strength and freedom in this new chapter of life. Mothers, too, visit in gratitude during pregnancy or after childbirth. They wash the temple steps with goat's milk and honey, symbols of life's sweetness and purity. Some hold special moon naming ceremonies for their newborns, whispering the child's name before the statue of the goddess, hoping that moonlight will gently watch over them all their life. The Temple of Artemis is not merely a religious center. It is a refuge for the soul, the heart of an entire community. Here, people laugh and cry. They make vows, they find peace. Some come in the still of night, just to sit beneath a column in silence, and feel that serenity descending from the stars. And for travelers from afar, the temple is a beacon. In an age without compasses, its white marble towers were visible from great distances. To sailors, they were the eyes of the goddess herself, watching over the sea, guarding every journey home. Now, return once more to the center of the temple, standing before the statue of the goddess. Close your eyes, and in your heart speak your wish. Let it rise with the smoke of prayers, drifting upward into the deep night sky. In the next chapter, we will explore the dramatic fate of this temple, how it was destroyed, rebuilt, and lost again in time. How does a miracle endure through centuries of change? Let us continue listening to the quiet whispers of the temple. For now, breathe gently and let this journey blend into your dreams as the moonlight of the goddess silently touches your night. And yet, not long after this sacred temple was first completed, a sudden and devastating disaster arrived. In the year 356 BCE, under the veil of night, a young man named Herostratus crept quietly toward the temple. He did not come to pray. He brought no offerings. Instead, in his hands, he carried fire, and he placed it where the temple was most vulnerable. The flames spread like a furious beast, devouring timber beams and wooden statues. Thick smoke rose into the dark sky, and the fire's red glow lit the distant hills. The Temple of Artemis, the goddess's palace, was being swallowed by fire. It was no accident. This was an act of deliberate arson. Herostratus' motive shocked the ancient world. He wanted his name to be remembered, forever carved into history through an act of destruction. And in a strange, tragic way, he succeeded. Though the city-states of the ancient world banned the mention of his name, forbidding its remembrance, history could not forget. He would be remembered as the man who burned the temple to be famous. But the story of the temple did not end in ash. On the charred remains of the sanctuary, the people of Ephesus did not remain in mourning for long. Instead, they rose with determination in their hearts and began preparations to rebuild the sacred hall. And curiously, on the very same night the temple was destroyed by fire in distant Macedonia, Alexander the Great was born. Later generations would whisper, this was no coincidence. It was as if the gods wanted humankind to remember this moment, the birth of a man who would conquer the known world, and the fall of a temple that once honored the divine. Years later, as Alexander's army swept across Asia Minor, he stood before the ruins of the temple and offered to pay for its complete reconstruction. But the priests of Ephesus, with quiet grace and reverence, refused to offer. They said, the house of one god must not be rebuilt by another. It was both a tribute to Artemis and a clever refusal of the conqueror's ambition. In the end, the people of Ephesus themselves rebuilt the temple. They summoned the finest architects and craftsmen, learning from the tragedy of the past. Wood was replaced with stronger stone, the structure reinforced, and new safety measures placed throughout the sacred grounds. The new Temple of Artemis was even grander than before. The number of columns rose from 100 to 127. Each stood 20 meters tall, arranged in perfect harmony, a breathtaking sight of balance and majesty. On each capital, delicate relief carvings depicted myth and nature. Artemis running through the forest, moonlight dancing in her hair, hounds racing beside her, and arrows streaking across the sky like falling stars. At the temple's heart stood a mysterious new statue of the goddess, said to have been carved from a fallen meteorite. She wore a crown upon her head, and across her chest, layers of pendants, symbols of fertility, of life, of sacred continuity. Priests once again tended to the altar. Pilgrims returned from every direction. During festivals, the temple glowed with lamplight and fire, incense perfumed the air, and chants rose like tides of devotion. This reborn temple became a spiritual beacon once more. It was not only the symbol of Ephesus, but a collective miracle, a masterpiece of faith, art, and architecture. And now, as you quietly close your eyes, I try to picture it, that towering temple, rising beneath the moonlight, like a vision in a dream. It waits, silent and shining, for the next pilgrim to approach with hope in their heart and a prayer on their lips. Time flows, like the tide rising and falling, again and again. The Temple of Artemis, built, burned, and rebuilt 3 times after centuries of splendor, could not escape the weathering winds of history. As the Roman Empire rose, Christianity gradually replaced the old gods of Greece. The once glorious Temple of Artemis, where incense once drifted and prayers once echoed, was now labeled a relic of paganism. The priests departed. Rituals ceased. The sacred statue was removed. The halls fell silent. Stone columns cracked and toppled, and once beautiful carvings were swallowed by wind and sand. And worse than time was, man. Stones were taken, repurposed to build Christian churches and city walls. Exquisite reliefs were torn from the walls, shipped across oceans to distant lands. Even the temple's foundations were buried by floods and silt, as if this miracle had never existed at all. But in the flowing river of human memory, it was never truly lost. In the year 1869, a British archaeologist named John Turtle Wood led an expedition to the ancient ruins of Ephesus, in what is now modern-day Turkey. Through thick mud, through layers of time and water, his team dug patiently for years. And finally, beneath centuries of silence, they found it. The remnants of the temple, stone foundations that once held mighty columns, fragments of statues, weathered but dignified, and marble bases still standing, drenched in underground water, but unbowed by time. In that moment, it was as if a long-forgotten dream was being gently awakened. The Temple of Artemis was no longer just legend. It had once been real, a monument of stone and spirit. The carved lines, the fallen columns, each seemed to whisper its own story, quiet and eternal. Today, if you visit the town of Selçuk in Turkey, you will find the temple's resting place. There, one solitary column still stands, lonely, yet proud, like an aged sentinel, guarding the memory of a vanished world. The wind drifts between the broken stones, rustling through grass and silence, brushing lightly against your thoughts like a hand reaching back through time. In the distance, the glow of modern lights. Beneath your feet, the dust of ancient stones. And in your mind's eye, perhaps the temple rises once more, a forest of columns, white as snow under moonlight, and the goddess, serene and still, bathed in silver glow, bringing calm to a restless world. Perhaps this is the true nature of a miracle. Not whether it survives forever in stone, but whether it plants a seed in memory, a gentle presence blooming in the quietest corners of time. In that stillness between dreams, in the hush before sleep, you might just hear it. The faint chime of an ancient bell carried by the wind, the Temple of Artemis, a lost wonder, an undying echo, now gently guiding you into dreams. Good night.